What's up, everybody? Today on the Yours Truly podcast, I have Chezi Spero. Chezi is an active participant in this little corner of the internet. He plays in the live stream culture represented on Grail Country's channel, operates his own YouTube channel, The Young Levite, and is a streaming facilitator on the Randos United Just Chatting channel. All these digital spaces share a strong connection to Paul Vanderklay's years-long project downstream from the Jordan Peterson phenomenon. The process of Paul's publicly synthesizing Peterson, John Vervaeke, Jonathan Pageau lectures, conversations, and ideas into culture, religion, and Christianity on YouTube has allowed for the emergence of a wide range of conversation participants, which includes atheists, agnostics, evangelicals of all stripes, Protestants, Catholics, and Orthodox. It has also seriously intersected with parts of Judaism. Chezi is an active leader and doer in the continuation of these cross-religious dialogues in this little corner with Judaism and the like, as he is involved with what is called the Noahide Judaism, which we'll unpack more in this episode. He has given me very helpful encouragement along my journey into this public conversation, and that has been incredibly meaningful to me. We are finally getting a chance to sit down for a conversation and exercise the sacred act of thinking out loud together. So, without further delay, I give you Chezi Spero, the Young Levite. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. And here we are.
Hello, sir.
Hey, man.
Good to see you, Christian.
You too, Chezi. Yeah, man.
Thanks for inviting.
Yeah, well, this has been, it's been a short journey for me so far, but I've made mention I'm kind of a country boy from Arkansas, really rural part of the United States, and one of the most exciting and humbling parts of this coming into a conversation that's kind of global, kind of international, multicultural, multi-religious. And so you've been a part of that. You kind of represent a part of that. And so I'm kind of interested in you. Like, I don't really know the journey of you into this space, how long, what that's looked like, why you've felt connected. And so I'd be interested to hear that, like, to start out.
Sure. And again, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. And I think the work you've been doing so far has been awesome. It's very much in the flavor and language of the TLC. So it's beautiful to see. And I would say that really for me also culminated in seeing, I'm forgetting his name right now, this Jordan Peterson fan. He was really into Jordan Peterson.
Edge of Thought.
Edge of Thought, right.
Tom,
so
yeah, Tom.
Edge of Thought, seeing you interact with him and just seeing how he was so fascinated with the space sort of that you were also articulating, I thought it was just like a beautiful job of someone that's coming into the TLC, understands, and then very quickly is back out there, so to speak, paying it forward. So I think it was very beautiful. So thank you. With regards to my story. So I am an Orthodox Jew. My parents are originally from the States, but they moved to Israel in the early 80s. And I have siblings that were born in the States. My twin sister and I were born here in Israel. Just giving you like a little background. My dad's
What year were you born?
In 1987.
Okay, I'm 85.
Yeah, right. So my dad is a psychologist, clinical psychologist. My mother was a educator in a girls' Orthodox seminary. And my family, my grandfather was a very prominent rabbi in Ohio. So there's a rabbis in my family. So that's sort of like the cultural background. And I, over the years, have been, and of course, due to my father's education as well, I was always trying to balance between a so to speak, modern world or secular world and a religious mindset and framework. And that was very much very much in the ether, in the air, with regards to looking at concepts of the Bible through a psychological lens. So Freud and Jung and characters like this and Eric Neumann, they were around the Shabbat table, so to speak. After many years, I served in the army. I was in a seminary for Jewish studies for many years. I taught there for a few years. I was getting a little nervous with the advancement of AI and technology, and also the meaning crisis, or what we now call the meaning crisis. At the time, it was just, sort of like forces sort of closing in a certain aspect, in a respect. And I went around speaking to local rabbis, trying to see if they could gauge what's coming, if they see what we now are calling a Kairos moment. But do you see these things happening? And are you ready for it? Are you preparing the groundwork? And I was quite disappointed with the responses I saw. And looking at the sages and the rabbis of days past, I was playing a little online, playing a little with Jung and this rabbi named Rav Kook, seeing how they interact. And then I see this video of a man named Jordan Peterson. I was like, who's this dude? So I started watching some of his classes. I was like, Abba's father. I'm like, you got to check this guy out. So my dad was like, oh yeah, I think I've seen something of his in the past. Sure, great. So we spoke about him a little, and that was it. Roughly like a year later, Bill C-16 comes up. I'm like, Dad, it's this dude again. And now what really hit me was, it was interesting from a cultural perspective. That was, Kathy Newman and things like that. That was cute. And everything I represented, I'm into, and that was very interesting. But his biblical series, I was like, hold the phone. Yeah. I'm like, for me, this was the first time experiencing much of, let's say, Jewish wisdom articulated in a complete, like in a secular fashion. It also sounded very sexy. The reason I use that term is you have to, like, many of these things that Jordan was pointing at in our text, they're in Aramaic and in very condensed language. So it's years of taking those things apart and cross-referencing them. So seeing it was fascinating. And coming from a congregation where the rabbi speaks, or like any sermon from a pastor, people are passing out in the pews, so to speak. Here, there's people paying like, $300 to hear this guy talk about God. I'm like, this to me was just crazy. And I started just like searching and seeing, are people seeing this? The crescendo also, again, was him coming to Israel and speaking. So I came with my, this is a long story. I'm sorry.
That's all right. I'm interested.
I came with my brother.
I see why you like the Edge of Thought one now. It's all clicking, so keep going.
I came with my brother, both my brothers. I bought them tickets. I'm like, we're going to go watch Jordan Peterson. My older brother is a rabbi and a lawyer, and both of them are my older brothers. Another one works for the government. He's secular. And so we're there, we're sitting down. He's speaking about Abraham. He's doing his spiel. He talks about how, everyone's looking at Israel. It's very hard to understand who you guys are. It's a mystery. You guys are the castle on the hill. This is like nuts. And you see, like, it's packed with Orthodox Jews that have to hear like this pseudo-Christian come from Canada to tell them. I mean, it was just so surreal. And when we left, I went out with my brothers to eat, and I looked at my secular brother. I was like, so how was it? He's like, it was the most amazing thing. I was like, what do you think about the fact that Dad spent good money making sure that you knew how to read for your bar mitzvah, the Genesis portion, because that was when you were born, and you read that, you completely forgot about that, gave that up, and now you're paying good money to hear someone tell you again about what you learned. And the fact that your son, because he's in a secular education, has no access to this. He's like, it's breaking my heart. Like, it's killing me. And to me, these were all elements of this is a new language, so to speak, where we could be reaching, or there's a re-enchantment, so to speak. Then I saw a man named Paul Vanderklay. This person seemed very interesting to me. I saw this guy named Jacob and Joseph pop on. I reached out to them. I got into Jacob's Corner, which is part of, this little corner. And that sort of started a beautiful conversation. That's like roughly 2 years ago. And since then it's been a fascinating journey, which really, it now intersects with many different elements of my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, well, thanks. That makes so much sense to me. I don't know, yes. And it makes sense why, why we're having this conversation, and that is in and of itself mysterious and fascinating, so yeah, that's why you're here. That's why I'm here. I do see most of this downstream from the meaning crisis that was kind of you use the word crescendo with the new atheism in Western culture. Pardon me. And then this kind of 2016 being kind of like a bomb going off for multiple reasons, political reasons, spiritual reasons. Went off in my life. It sounds like you were like getting Peterson right around that time too. It's like you tapped it somehow, I guess, on YouTube or something. You tapped into it. You said like the political angle. That's right. Yeah. So yeah. And then we see behind that political thing. Well, what's driving this? And it's just this, incredible connection. And the way I've kind of viewed some of it is like there was a maturing of psychology as a science, even, and where, I'm sure your dad would have insight to that, and you do as well from that. But that's kind of how I looked at it. Cause the whole, this shrink and there was this whole thing, and there's probably some validity to all that, but as that science has formalized and hardened some, Peterson was like a really, I would assume a pretty good example of the hardening of that from a scientific, and then bringing that language you talked about, and then that synthesis with meaning and religion, and specifically, the historical biblical text into that. It was it's magical. It's like
magical, because it just seemed like he kept on like tapping into and in the early years of Peterson, there would be, I'm saying this because I assume you were sharing this experience as well. I don't know if you're walking around the house and you're listening to him, right? And you have to stop yourself. You're like, God damn, he spoke for 5 minutes and every point was like, boom, boom. Like it just layer and layer and layer.
Yeah.
And that, it was really, really fascinating to see. For a while, I called him like a modern day Jethro. Like that's how I sort of saw him in a certain sense.
Because he's secular.
Because he's secular. Exactly. Because he's secular. And also because, so there is, in Jewish text, we are told there's a midrash that talks about how Jethro would worship all the known gods at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And in a certain sense, it wasn't because he's foolish, it's because he knew ultimately there's something behind all of these. And I just don't know which one it is yet. In this midrash, there's the staff of Abraham that the Kenites received through lineage, and it's planted in the garden, and it has on it the tetragrammaton, but Jethro doesn't understand this. And it's like the original King Arthur story. And he says, whoever manages to remove this staff gets to marry my daughter. And Moses recognizes the tetragrammaton and takes it out and like, oh, great, you're going to marry my daughter. But the point being is there was a sense where Jethro was tapping into the truth at the time. And he said, like, I know that it's bigger than just what's happening around me. And hearing Jordan Peterson, speak to Sam and all the lure around him, you saw someone that was, and now he articulates that into we who wrestle with God, right? But even that for me is like, you're just that's my namesake, right? That's like the name Israel is that. So seeing and this is also why why being in this little corner is so fascinating, which is I'm very interested in seeing how we get to that pure speech where I could finally feel comfortable conversing with Christians and, please God, Muslims also, where the language, the jargon is a lot more familiar, and where there's opening now for for really a joint dance, and for us to know each other better and to understand our religions better because of that.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, because he also was doing something with the scientific language and also integrating. I think when he I'm sure he's maybe was purposeful with this, but his integration of evolution into the conversation disarmed almost everybody that was like that, like knocked a wall down completely. So on that side of things, but even within, I don't know I don't know as much in Judaism, but within Christianity, there was, sects that were okay with that, not okay with that. And it just kind of like leveled that playing field. And so that there was a bridge, a conversation bridge that could now happen. Well, okay, let's look at this psychologically instead of some other way. And then we can talk that way. And it's funny that you mentioned the Sam Harris, those conversations, because when he talked about heaven and hell in that conversation, that was like a seminal moment for me of like one of those, like, pull the phone, like, oh my God. Like that I just remember having to stop and just be like, I mean, he just did that. I think I look back at that moment as one of the biggest moments. Was that one of the bigger, what was one of the bigger moments for you? If you can name one.
Much of what he says is not necessarily novel.
Sure.
And definitely, I would love him to interact. Like, I know he's playing around with Jonathan Peugeot, and I don't want to say Jonathan Peugeot is a lightweight, but like Jonathan Peugeot has to play around in my little world. And by my little world, I mean the people that are much greater than I am. But I think for me, like if I had to find like a specific moment, I mean, it would be him crying in Israel, speaking to all of us. That would be that would probably be where I looked around I wasn't even looking at him. I was just looking around. I'm like, to see if other people are looking at me, being like, are you guys seeing this? Is this happening? So to me, that was it was just crazy. It was really, really crazy to see. And just also to put this in a certain frame, and Jacob in Jacob's little corner, he's very much opposed to this expression of mine. But since 1948, I really believe that like the Bible became alive again. I feel like there's a tension in the world, which is like suddenly these people, the Israelites that basically were disappeared from history, boom, they're here again in the historic homeland. And then like all these elements like Hebron and the Tomb of the Patriarchs and the Temple Mount, like this, both in the Christian world and in the Muslim world, creates a lot of tension. Like, what does this mean right now? So, starting from 1940, I mean, starts much way before that, but from 1948 on, I am very much seeing what in Judaism we called Atchalta de Geulta, the beginning elements of redemption, and seeing someone like Jordan Peterson, or the emergence of someone like Jordan Peterson, or conversations of John Vervaeke or Ian McGilchrist. All those to me are those indications. The fact that, and you articulated this beautifully about, there's been 7 years of us absorbing all this information, right? Everyone, it's like this Jordan Rogan phenomenon, the long form, and suddenly you realize that the housewife, the plumber, the painter, the guy in the field, everyone here has potential to absorb this information. And for years and years and years of this, is this what the Bible talks about or the prophets talked about when, the knowledge of God washes over the whole world? Like when you have this kind of expression of the internet where suddenly all these floodgates get open up. And what's even more reassuring is it's not there are more Sam Harrises. In fact, we're seeing a completely different conversation. So is it Brahman? Is it Jesus? I'm not even interested in that right now. I'm just like, yes, let's do it. So when I see Ben Shapiro as a prominent Jew, forget where he is politically, I have many issues with the person, but telling Christians go to church, right? That's like amazing. That's like a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful moment to see that and to understand what that means. So all those are all little data points. When I put them together, they start painting a very, very optimistic picture.
That's very powerful to me for you to say that about Ben, because his first conversation with Dave Rubin, was similar for me. And obviously both a secular Jew and a Orthodox Jew, but just the conversation, because, in that very form, Dave Rubin being gay, that was, there was a lot of beauty to that. And that was like what I look back to almost as a moment for me that represents what you're talking about now, 6-7 years down the road. And even I've said that about Peugeot, that he says go to church. He doesn't, as orthodox as he is, right. He says the same thing. And it's like, whoa, that is extremely powerful. And I've been, I don't know how to put all the pieces together. I think I'm very steeped into, I'm in the South in the United States. I'm very, very steeped into the modern evangelical ethos. But what this space and this journey, post Peterson, post New Atheism, but even with the Peugeot thing, because the interesting thing about, ancient worship is how much closer does that touch our Jewish brothers and sisters, and it's that same kind of thing you're talking about. There's something to that. And I was even reading, I don't know. I saw this in all the barrage of information that we're all exposed to, is that the Orthodox, there was a season where their churches were being shared by Muslims in certain parts of their buildings were, because of strife or conflict. I don't know if that's true or not, but anyways, I don't know how to get too far in the weeds on that, because honestly, I have a lot of ignorance, geopolitically or even religiously, outside of a kind of a Protestant framework. But what you're saying is so fascinating to me, and you've engaged with me online, like I said in the intro, in such a profound way, and bringing up that conversation with Tom, Edge of Thought, and why that makes sense, why this makes so much sense, because Peterson and kind of Paul and John, everybody are giving us a language and a foundation or something for. I love this word. I've been thinking about understanding what's underneath our standing is something. And the point I was going to make, which let me hit my branding here. The point that I was going to make was when you talked about Peterson crying in his conversation there in Israel, that is also when he had that very meaningful return to the internet in his conversation with Jonathan Peugeot, and they talk about the narrative. That same point is talking about when the narrative touches reality. Mm-hmm. I mean, he was standing on it when he was talking to you guys, so like that to me also makes sense why that was so powerful. And I think because it's one thing to psychologically approach scripture and then to physically be surrounded by it. So,
I mean, right. He said that, the faith of the world is dependent on Israel, right? So that's, to hear, that's a crazy thing for him to say.
Oh,
And
that's what's under our standing.
Right, but to understand that, like, he didn't leave Israel, go to England, and then say, like, England, the world, the faith of the world is dependent on England. Like, you understand what I mean? Like, it's not like that he's selling that in every place he goes. So
yeah, that's powerful.
That's why it was very powerful to see. I agree with you that it's I use the example from Zephaniah about pure speech and the Tower of Babel being the example of when language gets co-opted and corrupted, so to speak, right? It was one language, seemingly everyone understood each other, yet no one understood each other, right? Then we have in Hebrew, it's Bavel, Migdal Bavel, the Tower of Babel. Bavel also means lebelbel, to confuse, because God, confused the languages, so to speak, right? And then they get dispersed. And there's a midrash also that Abraham was one of the builders of the Tower of Babel. And then he's called the Hebrew because in Hebrew it's Ever, means he's on the other side of the river. As everyone's on one side, he's on the other side, right? He's looking for something else. He's looking for something new. There's many similarities from the Eastern traditions with Brahma and the Hindu river, and his wife is called Shursti, and Abraham's wife is called Sarah. So there's a whole interesting joint past over there as well. But I think creating a pure speech is what we're attempting to do right now. And when I see someone like Jacob in Jacob's little corner argue with Paul about the Trinity and speak to Sam about Unitarianism, that is that beautiful new speech starting to come together. And when I see Sam go on his video and say, I'm going to be speaking about the Tetragrammaton in the name of God, I'm going to be sensitive to my Jewish friends, and I'm going to try to refrain from using the actual word only when I need to use it, right? Amazing, right? That is amazing that he wants to do that. And it's because he's sensitive to us understanding that. And that's why I could also engage with him in this conversation. But this goes all the way back to Judah the Prince, the rabbi who put together a lot of our Mishnah and Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud and the Mishnah. He had a very, very loving and intimate relationship with Marcus Aurelius. And there's a whole conversation going on there, which goes all the way back to Esau and Jacob, which were both great nations. Unfortunately, there was that split, but both were supposed to there to help each other. One from the spiritual, one from the more natural and physical sense. But unfortunately, there was that split. And I believe and I hope that, and again, this is symbolic, but if Christians in Judaism in some way represent also Esau, and obviously Islam is Ishmael, and there's a sense where all the boys have to come back together, and that's why, again, when you see the Abraham Accords, we're living in this modern world, and nevertheless, one of the most influential peace agreements of our time has Abraham in it, and like what that means that they're using that and they're tapping into that. And that's why I think people are foolish when they, even when they look, we don't have to get into the politics, when the Israel-Palestinian war going on right now, the undergirding elements are religious. And as long as we avoid talking about those things, then we're not ever actually going to solve the problem. But
yeah, man, I'm trying to hold on to three things, I think.
I'm sorry. There's a lot
That's okay. Let me see if I can hold on to them. Actually, I'm going to type them down. Okay.
Sure.
Okay. They all have to do with Abraham. Let's see if there's that one. Okay, well, I've got two of them. Oh, no.
Your story, your vision of Abraham.
That was part of it, yeah. The other one, okay, go ahead. We can go there. That was part of it, yeah. Go ahead.
We don't have to, I know, you're self-conscious of if I'm repeating this story too much, but it's going to happen. So just every now and then change it up. You're under Isaac. No, just saying you were Sarah. I think it's first of all, it's beautiful. The whole saga of I'll meet you by the truth. All of it is heart-wrenching and so inspiring. Your father-in-law hugging you, it's all amazing. And in a sense, I know in Christianity, there's this sense of like, Jesus died for our sins, right? But in Judaism, there's just, God is waiting for you. Like it says, until the day he dies, I wait for him to repent. Come back. And I'm saying what your wife offered you and what your father offers you, that God offers all of us.
That's right.
So and all you need to do is accept it. And the image of you in the fetal position and that whole imagery is very deep, and it resonates very, very deeply. And it's, I know maybe then it was death. Obviously, it was horrible. Now I'm sure it's empowering in a certain sense. One has to be careful not even to ride that wave in the inappropriate way, which is like not using that story to bolster myself, which I don't, of course, think you're doing. I'm just saying these are very delicate things that we have to play around with. And so that imagery of Abraham, and I commented in one of your videos about this song, "Dreaming Like Joseph."
Yes, yeah, I wanted to touch on that.
But it's your show.
To add, I recently added this part to that story, which I did feel like there was a call in my life to do this, ministry, follow God with my vocation type thing, and that was kind of, it was a very mystical thing that happened while I was at this little Baptist rally, and like the whole thing kind of faded from what was happening, and it was like I was having these thoughts about what that meant, and that was very, very powerful moment. And then when we got married, there was there's this Christian music artist named Andrew Peterson, and he wrote a song called "Canaan Bound." And it tells the story of Abraham and Sarah. And that artist was very his favorite of my in-laws. And me and my wife had started at that time. We started listening to him, and we loved this song, and we thought about it for our lives, and we wanted it to play it at our wedding, but we actually wanted to record it ourselves, singing it. And so we did, and we changed a few of the words, some of the stuff about Sarah being barren. We didn't add that into our song, but it's the story of them setting out on a life together. So me and my wife, then we recorded the songs playing during the part of our wedding ceremony where we actually took the Lord's Supper together, and we're on a kneeler, which is not typical in a Baptist church. And then so that song's playing over us while we're participating in this sacred act together, starting our life. And then, the rest of that story, you've heard the rest of that story. And I think about Abraham's life. I think about them setting off the adventure and him struggling to be a truthful person, then having another like inspired moment with the covenant that God made between he and himself. And then there's the polyamorous situation that caused a lot of pain, and still, we still think that that's a reality today. And that it comes to this other point of absolute trust. And so, yeah, it's been I also found out on a tweet that March 25th, my birthday, is a historical, at least maybe in the Eastern Church, the day that they say is that Isaac's sacrifice. I don't know if that's in the
I have to see if it correlates with the Hebrew date. What, March what?
25th.
It'll be interesting to see. I'm writing this down. I'm going to check this out later. I said I'm writing this down. I'm going to follow up with this.
That's fine.
We'll see how real this is, Christian.
So yeah, but it just was like, oh my gosh, I don't know how much more of this I can take. But
your birth certificate, my name was really Abraham.
And then the other piece I wanted to tag in was, so Richard Rowland, have you seen some of his stuff? So he's really going deep into the Eastern church myths related to Abraham and the language as well. Like that story of him receiving Hebrew. Is that part of, is there a midrash on that?
A little, but more. I mean, like we already know, like the angels are aware of Hebrew, and like the Torah is written. The God looked into the Torah and created the world, so like Hebrew is already there beforehand. The language of Bnei Kedem, the people from the east, that this ancient generation, they also apparently, again according to the Midrash, they also spoke Hebrew. Even though, to be fair, Greek is considered one of the most beautiful languages, and it's considered one of the most beautiful languages. I'm saying the Talmud talks about how it is one of the most beautiful languages, and that's why also you could write the Bible in Greek for that reason, because there's a divine quality to it.
That's interesting. I did do a year of Greek and Hebrew in my undergrad. I was terrible at it, but my degree says biblical studies with an emphasis in biblical linguistics, and that's a total sham of a degree from my perspective. I mean, I did it, but it was it's a part of my story, but it's not something that I can say that I've been really faithful to, But there's just been a lot of connection to that, and even as you followed along my story, and I'm following more along to yours, and I even noted that your last young Levite video was on and it had the image of Abraham and Isaac. I think it was your last one. It was a recent one.
Yeah, I mean, like a month ago or 2 months ago, I spoke about sacrifice, and I gave the perspective of, do we eventually move towards a vegetarian sort of future? This last week, I spoke about, no, we don't go towards a vegetarian. I mean, I give basically both opinions, or there's multiple opinions, so I could play around with those. So yes, this week I spoke about sacrifice. I mean, again, the temple in general is taking a lot of these pagan ideas, but more specifically, the undergirding truth elements to them, or divine elements to them, as in there is forces in nature that are also divine. However, they all have to happen in the proper orientation and the proper context. So obviously, Judaism is very against any sort of blood culture, right? Drinking blood or no bathing in blood. But inside the temple, there's blood going all around, and there's no sacrifices and there's no altars. Nevertheless, inside the temple, you have sacrifices and altars. Same thing with incense, all the way to the actual idols, right? You have cherubs, right? That's also bananas. Now, all that's happening in a specific place. The temple itself is we are all still in the seventh day, right? There's the first day, the second day, and all those days end. There's specific language also in the text of how we know that day ended. We're still in the seventh day, and God has rested, right? And now alongside of him, we're all anticipating the eighth day. The temple is an eighth day product element in a seventh day world. So it keeps getting destroyed because it's not something that could actually stay here so long unless there's proper orientation, right? So when the tabernacle is built, it gets filled with smoke, right? And even Moses can't be over there. There's like a sense where like now it's in perfect orientation. Of course, due to our transgressions, we're not there anymore. But so there's a deep teaching also with regards to Aaron, that him building the golden calf also, or his participation with that, wasn't him attempting to participate in idol worship. Rather, and nor did they think that was God. Rather, they thought that this was going to replace Moses as a mediator, as a leader. But, Aaron decided to take the most powerful natural animal that exists at that time, and that is to give an example of the powers of nature, but all in the name of heaven's sake. Nevertheless, God at that point is saying, if you would have built an idol that looked like a cherub, that has the image of a child on it, which is the image of God, as in like you were made in the image of God, maybe that would have been okay. But instead of seeing yourself as the image of God, you went back to nature and decided to go to this calf that ultimately lowers his head to eat the grass and lowers himself down to nature. So it wasn't necessarily the fact that they build the idol. It's the fact that they missed the mark. They misunderstood what it is they're being called to do and what kind of relationship they're called to have with God. Obviously, with the cherubs, you could see you go into this, and there's a cultural appropriation happening over here, where God is aware of the fact that there's the cherub riders in Samaria and what's going on over there. So he comes and says, "Yes, build me a chariot, build me a throne with cherubs." But anyone that goes into the Holy of Holies is going to notice that there's nothing riding on top of it. It's invisible. There's nothing there. There's nothing between the cherubs. So this was also like a shock and awe statement, where like I'm going to use the cultures around me to stress the fact that, like, we're talking, this is a different story over here, so to speak.
I don't, this is interesting, talking symbolism, and how that obviously intersects with this space, with what the work that Peugeot's brought into it. It's made me more conscious, more aware, bring a lot of value and meaning to that in my Christianity. I'm wondering, in Judaism, is there a lack of symbolic awareness to the culture and people in that faith as well, that you're hoping people reacquaint themselves with?
No, there's no lack of,
it's different.
No lack of symbolism. There's it's packed. I mean, it's called the Pardes, which is an acronym for Pshat, Drash, Raz, Sod, different levels of interpretation of the Torah. So there's surface level, there's Midrash, there's the secret, there's the the mystical level, so to speak. So when one is learning, you could always go deeper, and it depends in what context that is happening. Well, but symbolism is peppered all around that, and we say Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim, and that means in shorthand, like father, like son. But we're told that the patriarchs observed all the commandments. Now you have to take a step back and be like, 1 second, are you telling me that Abraham kept all six? Like, he even kept Passover. Why did he just not tell his son, hey, guess what? It's going to be trouble down in Egypt. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they kept all of them. Rather, they, in their behavior, embodied the undergirding principles of those commandments, right? So,
Abraham's ultimate act of trusting God. I mean, that was the penult of his life. Like that was the arc and the aim ultimately.
I would say the arc and the aim of, God. Okay, so God's first attempt is with Enoch, right? I'm going to bring you this mysterious guy over here. He's walking, and God walks together side by side with him.
Right.
And Enoch in Hebrew also means educator, teacher, right? But the Midrash tells us it did not work out well. He at a time he managed to interact with the people, but ultimately he couldn't come down from the mountain, so to speak, and articulate and pass on this wisdom to the people, right? And then ultimately God says, all right, forget this. You're coming with me. He disappears, very mystical. Does he turn into Metatron? That's that's for a different podcast, for a different stream. Then we have character number 2, similar name, Noah, which also you could play with this meaning educator as well. Same as far as linguistically, the letters are similar. Here too, God is walking before him, but we still see God is playing with another partner, comes and says he's going to destroy the world. Noah doesn't think about the whole world, doesn't fight back, he's like, me and my family, we're all good, we're all safe. Okay. The next time God does this, right, because he destroys the world, he's not happy with this, 2.0 begins. And we are told about Abraham that he's walking before God. He's not waiting to walk beside him, and he's not walking behind him. He's not even waiting for the invitation. He is embodying what God wanted to see. And then God says, he uses the term matzati, I found, right? Like, what does that even mean? If you're God, he is playing this game with us and saying, where is this dude? Boom, there he is. And then he tells them, I'm choosing you because I see that you are going to teach your children and their descendants justice and charity. That's what he's looking for. That's what I was looking for. I needed to find someone that could promulgate this forward. And this relates to my work with the Noahide community. But
that's what I was wanting you to head into.
Through Abraham, all the nations of the world will be blessed through you. It's a universal. The mission is universal. If you look at Rashi, is a comment, a very, very famous commentator on on many different texts in Judaism, but specifically right now the Bible. And he talks about how the Hear, O Israel, the Shema, right, which we look at this as the statement of monotheism.
The Lord our God is one.
Correct. His interpretation is right now we Hebrews are aware of this. Soon, all the world will be aware of this as well. This is a mission statement. This is not a declaration. This is like what eventually we hope is going to happen. Now, for 2,000 years, roughly, Jews were very busy with like, hey, don't kill us. Hey, relax, guys. Moving around, pogroms, moving away from a lot of the, I would say, like embodied, experiential portion of our religion, and focusing very heavily on the text, on learning, on the rules, on the commandments, because of we built ourselves an exile exoskeleton, so to speak, which was very helpful, very heavy though right now, and intertwined. So even if I want to remove it, I need to be very careful, because at this point it could be locked into the spine, it could be locked in over here. It's not easy for me to take this off. Now that we're back in the land, and I had a second to breathe, right? Metaphorically speaking. And I start having these conversations, and I'm looking around the world. I'm making peace with some Muslim countries, and the Christian world is reforming. Almost so much so to, I sent you that little article, right, in 2015.
Yeah.
The Vatican, right, comes out and says what it says. So now there's a space where we could finally come back to our universal title. Jewish people have three titles, three identities. There's the religious, which is Jacob.
Mm-hmm.
We have that whole beautiful story till the end of Genesis. Then we transform into our national form, Israel. Judges, rest of the Bible. We have yet to manifest as Jeshurun, right? Our universal name, and which all the nations of the world will be blessed through you. In that version, the Noahide path is a path offered basically to all the world. This is the universal, these are the universal teachings of Judaism, just for all the world. And we could break that down more, but on a high level, this is a path offered to all who want. There's specific 7 that also from them derive many more. Just like we have the 10 commandments, and from it we have derived many more. So there's a 7. There's different opinions whether you could keep more or not. I am in the school of thought that you could keep more if you'd like to. There's qualifications for this, but generally speaking, it is offering a path to anyone who wants to connect to God and cleave to God. And we believe as Jews that we are not genetically better in any way. And even the chosen people, I like the interpretation of treasured rather than chosen. Okay, which is we are all living in this world. We are but humble chimney cleaners. That's it. We want to make sure the divine conversation goes up properly, clean, and straight up. That's what we're here to do. We've had a experience for many, 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 many years, thousands of years of a conversation with the divine, and we're here to pass that on. Now, we're not telling the Noahides, you all need to become Jews. That's just simply not the case. We're very interested in this beautiful, diverse world. Just like in Judaism, we have the 70 facets of the Torah, which means there's this interpretation, that's interpretation. All these are the blind people touching the elephant, so to speak. The world nations and their different cultures and aspects represent a 70 facets of a universal version of the Torah, so to speak, or their oral Torah. So I'm expecting, and I am eager to see what a Chinese Noahide looks like and what a French Noahide looks like. And I don't expect them to participate or practice in the same manner. Yes, there's going to be things that need to be similar, but they're all coming with their own cultures. And not to be, and I hope this doesn't sound disrespectful, of course, but generally speaking, while there are the opinions that see Christianity and Islam and even potentially Hinduism as still qualifying as Noahides, we believe that, a Christian would come to the temple and he opens up his theological suitcase and there's a discussion. And we say, our sages would say, these 7 elements are awesome. Keep it up. These 5 elements, let's tweak them. These 6 elements are no longer relevant. But if you now need to go back to your parish and still use concepts and terms that are in your culture, then great, do that. That's because that's your conversation and that's your language. And even the postmodern world, which we're all scared of, there's elements of it that we could use, which is breaking down of these narratives allows us to potentially start having a more postmodernism together with mystical teachings from from the Christians, from the Sufis, from the Kabbalists, allow us to now start filling this space with a new language that maybe allows us to have a much more shared conversation and allows other people to participate that way.
That's so fascinating. I just released that conversation with Brendan Graham Dempsey today.
Who's Brendan? Is that the guy that was on Paul?
Yeah.
Better Modern guy?
Yeah. And I mean,
cool.
He's almost describing the exact same thing as his metamodern vision of religion.
So Maimonides talks about this around 1,000 years ago, right? There are many Jews, Orthodox Jews, that are not aware of this. It's because it was so not the conversation to have. And even now when I talk to people about it, they're like, aren't there like Jewish poor people still that we need to take care of? Like, why are you talking about, like, first of all, you could do both. You could chew gum and walk at the same time.
Yeah.
And second of all, this is the mission. Yes, of course, we need to take care of the people and all that's true. But again, we don't proselytize. The mission isn't for me to go on the top of the mountain. And that's why I don't go around inviting someone to become a Noahide. I'm here to answer questions and engage with someone in good faith. And that's really all I'm interested in doing. And that's why, sorry.
It sounds like that sounds very meta.
I mean, God is meta.
Yeah, he is.
I really believe that when God tells Moses, I interacted with Abraham under the name El Shaddai, right? But I'm interacting with you under the Tetragrammaton. What does that mean? There are different levels of understanding. Like, I don't know if we need to be scared to say that our interaction, maybe again, I believe that prophecy and the Holy Spirit, so to speak, was palpable in the air during the time of the prophets and definitely during the first temple, right? So like no Jew in the field, no one asked him like, do you believe in the resurrection and what's going to be like in heaven? He wasn't thinking about that. He's like, yeah, we're going to go to the temple soon and I'm living this embodied life together with God. But there's a sense where we have to understand that we are, as we say, as dwarves on the shoulders of giants, right? Yeah. We can see further. We have a different language, and we don't have to be scared about that.
I agree. Yeah, and it does have a sense of vulnerability because you maybe don't see that many dwarves standing next to you or something like. But that is kind of the conversation. That is kind of like this thing right here. Even it feels like, and I don't really, because and I told Brendan this, like I come at this as a practitioner of the modern, initially as the modern rock and roll Christian service leader, worship leader. And that as I started adding in more historical elements to that, it started to inform my thoughts about that. And then I had to step back away from it for a long time to focus, on the things that were most important, from the individual to the family to the relationship, and then back into the temple, to use a language. But it is, as I'm coming back into this space and I'm continuing to dig into what it looks like to participate with a group of people in the worship of God, and really, I mean, holding it out in front of me like this meta sense that it's like, what is this? Not just I'm doing it. This is what we're all doing. Like you were saying, like just kind of like going along in this. We're doing our job, and then we go to church, doing our job. It's kind of I kind of am like, okay, if I'm gonna step back into this, so to speak, what is this that I'm stepping back into that I completely was separated from for like 7 years? And so that is, these kind of conversations are informing that and are encouraging that, and also because we are in this time where faith in the institutions are crumbling so fast every day in certain ways. So we are looking back. We're looking towards older things, towards things that have lasted a long time, and so that I feel like that's what stands underneath us, and we're, learning from and being encouraged by and being hopeful for, and also building trust and care, across those lines, because it's one thing to talk about a group of people that you don't know or don't have anybody that you care about, but then to say, well, let's at least build relationship together, and we can, and that's what that sounds like. The interesting thing, so I mean, to dive into the Noahide
Sure.
thing. Sorry if that's kind of rude sounding. To Noahide is, so to get a clearer understanding, so say with my Christianity, you step into that space, they're saying, okay, well, here's the core, and this part we don't think is appropriate, namely Jesus Christ or something like that. And then but you can go back to your parish and participate. Like, I'm trying to understand
what that looks like.
Yeah, that's hard to conceptualize.
Well,
because
sorry.
No, that's okay. I think that's it.
First, just there are opinions, right? It's quite controversial, but there are opinions. Okay, first off, just a statement as far as Jews. In the Talmud, it talks about how anyone who doesn't believe in idol worship is considered a Jew, is called a Jew, right? So the attitude is, again, we're looking for people to get closer and closer to recognizing the oneness of God, right? So once, you're done with Zeus and you're done with bowing down to this tree, you're already in the inner circle, right? So then obviously there's nuances how Islam interprets monotheism, and how Judaism interprets monotheism, and Christianity. But there is an opinion, or there are opinions by prominent rabbis that say that non-Jews can participate in something called shituf, which means joint worship. As in, a non-Jew can't do this, but the understanding is the nations of the world are still in this journey, right, of developing and understanding this relationship with God. And as long as their intermediaries are all stemming their power all stems from a specific source, from the one true God, then it's quote unquote kosher for a Gentile to participate in such a sense. Okay, which would mean Sam is definitely good, right? But even according to some rabbis, even your classic Christian, so to speak, would also be kosher in this sense, because ultimately he's speaking about the Father. So yes, there's this whole discussion about the begotten Son and who he is, but nevertheless, the seven are being kept. He understands that the source comes from God, then we're all good. Now, ideally, there's a sense where, at some point, no masks are needed anymore, right? Or let's say I'll use the term intermediary or mask with regards to Jesus, with all due respect, of course. Now, when I'm articulating coming to the temple, right, and and there are different verses in our text, of course, in our Bible, that talks about how the Gentiles come to the temple and they worship God, and then they go worship their other gods. Like, they still doing that while the temple is being built. And there's a discussion of how they're coming to learn from the past of God, the different ways and past of God, but then continue their own thing. So the sense would be, you are growing up in a culture where the concepts like Mary have a very deep whole cultural behind it. I don't want to rip that away from you, because you need that that is how you were raised, and that is how billions of Christians interact. So I need to, quote unquote, I don't know if I want to use this terminology, I'll use it, but let's say purify that, so to speak, in where there isn't an understanding that is like, this person is, this person is a god or some other problematic issue with regards to Judaism. But once that, quote unquote, has been cleaned, please continue using that concept. And if you have to have a picture of Mary, like, it's all good, because now you are now explaining God, so to speak, through this jargon, through your culture, right? So I'm expecting the Indian, the Pakistani Noahide to still wear his sari and all that carries with it because of those elements, right? So again, there are certain things that won't be relevant anymore, right? So, and there's certain things that need to change. Nevertheless, we are looking for unity through diversity. We can't all be the same thing. Then it's a monster, right? So there's a saying in Judaism, which is Israel among the nations is like a heart in the body, right? Like, if it's a body full of hearts, it's not going to work. And if it's a body full of legs, it's not going to work. And I can't function, even if I'm a heart, without a brain, without eyes, without a leg. So it's a joint thing that we're doing together, but everyone has to fill their role.
Man, that's hitting on the religio and the liturgy conversation with Berveki, like that. The ligature that's holding us together, and then something that the hierarchy of meaning and value. You've already hit on that. That was something that I've been speaking of in some of my conversations of worship and having to use the Greek word, the telos of that being the higher or the deeper meaning. And I, as a Christian, I look at things like what are called, our sacraments that would help us orient ways when I've been a part of a tradition that didn't have those. But then you're also talking about, it's interesting using the language, making Mary kosher. That's so interesting. That's a beautiful thought. That's a beautiful thought, actually. And that was this whole conversation that I had with Brendan. I would be very interested to hear you guys talk, actually, because I don't know what his exposure to the Noahide, tradition or vision is.
Community now,
huh?
There's around 100,000 in the world right now. It's like it's a growing community.
Yeah, and it makes sense why you feel like, okay, there's space to play, there's space to engage and converse and care, to see the body of God become more unified and intact. Yes.
And the diversity is real. So we just had a class yesterday, and I was talking so the organization I work for came out with a prayer book and a religious codex that's for Noahides specifically, and we go through all the laws and proper conduct, things that they could take on if they want to. But I gave an example of, there are opinions that believe that if Noahides want, they could observe the Shabbat. However, it talks about how Noahides need to eventually create their own Noahide sages, and they're going to decide for themselves like what they consider exertion, or what they like, because it doesn't have to mirror how Jews experience the Shabbat. They have their own relationship and culture that they want to turn that into. So is it a good day for Torah study? Yes. Should you avoid doing like XYZ? So those things we could have similar, but how exactly that's experienced would be different. An example would be Jews celebrate their bar mitzvah at the age of 13, right? And then I'm responsible for my transgressions at that point. There's some caveats to that, but generally speaking, that's the truth. The whole 613, I'm now responsible. At the same time, I would say that a Noahide coming to me right now from New York, right? That's his family's now deciding to take this on. When should my son take on these commandments? Now, if you're living in a culture where you're drinking a keg at 21 in college, right? Maybe don't take those commandments on yet, because it looks like your culture is still pretty immature for a long time. So how about for that community, once you're at the age of 24, then you could have your quote unquote Noahide bar mitzvah. And that would fit each culture differently. So it's not only playing isn't a bug. Playing is the feature. Playing within bounds is the feature.
So a friend of mine, he's half ethnically Jew. He's a Christian. He's taken his family to, probably a dozen bar mitzvahs over the years. His oldest son just turned 14, and he's, like so many people our age, that, we can look back in Western America and Christian or, religious life and see ceremony and rites kind of had played out when we were young in a sense, but they were almost something that we didn't do, but we kind of saw our parents. But now our kids don't see it anywhere in the culture, except for his family. He's seeing this, and he's having a yearning for that for his life as a Christian. He doesn't. There have been rites of passage, things like catechism and other things that were probably more primal. And so he went out and he adopted this program put out by a pastor, and is walking his son, and his other son will go through it to create these ways of meaning, life of meaning, and that when you're talking about should a college student adopt, I don't know if you were talking about Shabbat or what you were talking about.
Any, like the commandments. He's a part of the
Yeah, so it's like, okay, it was a very, like you're saying, kind of not choose your own adventure book that I used to read as a kid. Like, but we regardless of if we think the ideal would be everyone get to Judaism, everyone get to the ancient church or something like that. We're having to piecemeal it together no matter what. That's where we find ourselves. Like, there are structures we can hop back into, but at the same time, they aren't even as acquainted, and some of them aren't even as acquainted with how to integrate this into our civilization. I think, and we're at this forefront, and then the Gen Z generation they're desperately hungry for it. We're kind of have an appetite for it, but they're desperate for it because it's like nowhere. So I think that's a beautiful project.
Well, again, when you see, the Sam Harris mindfulness app, right? And like the whole world is loving mindfulness. Orthodox Jews wake up in the morning and you have to be mindful which shoe you put on first. And then there's a sequence of which laces you tie. And everything is very much, you have to be mindful of all this at all times. I told Noahide that you could see that Buddhists rub their food before they eat it, right? And Jews make a blessing. But as far as I'm concerned, those are the same thing. We're stopping for a moment and doing that. And a modern interpretation of that would be called, hey, touch grass, right? But it's touch grass everywhere all the time, right? So when I'm using my computer, what makes me very scared is, and I mentioned this in the beginning, speaking to local rabbis over here. So like you mentioned that, we saw our parents do a certain model, which they also was closer, like the educational tools our grandparents gave our parents and our parents gave us are much closer than the educational tools we're giving our kids, because they're living in a completely different world.
Yes.
And what scares me is that as AI advances, Neuralink, all these things, biotech, people are talking about, you're going to be living till, 150, 200 years old in a 35-year-old body. Then humanity starts changing. And once humanity starts changing, first of all, I don't have any tools. So like, Dad, you tell me like, patience is a virtue. Is it not? I don't know. It's a new world. It could be that me demanding my kid be patient, I'm actually abusing him right now. Because he could be saying, I don't need to be patient. You're just a slow man. Like, you're just not getting with like what's going on around you. And I have to wonder, and this is what I ask rabbis, and why I think it's so important and why I think there's also a return back to all these religions, because we're looking for that ancient wisdom again, which is, okay, if I'm now like, if my son, my grandson, now they could tweak IQ, right? They could tweak, how this person's going to look, right? Do I have a religious commandment now to tweak my IQ? Let's say I do and my wife doesn't. Do I still need to be with her? Because now we're completely different people. Would that be grounds for divorce? If I'm living till 150, 200 years old, what does that mean to marriages? What is psychologically, can we be together? We say till death do you part, 60, 70 years, 200 years. Like, that's a really long time now to be like what does that mean? What does that mean towards relationships and bring it much closer, right? I give this example of the world is going to very soon, the second this is inside your head, or you even have this with ChatGPT. I give the example of the Moses story. Teacher comes to Chezi and says, hey, let's write a report about Moses. No problem. I go to my dad. My dad's a professor. My dad's a enlightened man, so to speak, right? So he gives me some ideas. I take some books. I write my thing out, right? And he gives me the books that he has, or I go to the library. Fast forward to Chezi's son, Billy, go write a story about Moses. That's what your teacher said, right? Hey, check online. He goes to ChatGPT, writes it in. Who's Moses? He then comes back to his teacher, right? Because he has all the notes. Who's Freud? And why did he talk about like Moses really being an Egyptian prince? And who are these other people that were in a basket before Moses? And why is the tabernacle the same exact size as Ramesses II's war camp? And if this teacher has no tools for this, how is he going to deal with this right now? And he has no idea about the different authors or the redactors of the Bible. And if he can't handle P or E, or he doesn't have that language, as a student, first of all, you're out. I don't trust anything you're going to say anymore. You have no idea what's flying. And even the rabbis, how do they want to navigate that? And as the gaps in time are getting smaller, you have relationships where a parent has tension with a son, with a child, right? Which an example would be you can't use electronics on Shabbat. So we don't. Eventually there'll be smart cities, and I'm assuming Jews will live in those smart cities, and I'm assuming those smart cities will also function on Shabbat in some sort of way. So then clearly the rabbis will have to find some sort of way to make it kosher. But the problem is, if it's been 100 years since that change, so that whole generation's dead, what are you going to do? It could be that now mother and son fought. Son now decides, I'm leaving the house because my mom doesn't understand me. She's not going to tell me how to experience my... Good, they have this tension. 10 years down the line, the rabbis come out and say, now this is okay. Son goes back to mom and says, so you hijacked God. You told me he was mad at me for doing this. And 5 years later, now the rabbis say it's okay. What do we do about that? And the mom says, well, what did I know? This is what they were telling me.
That's the meaning crisis you're talking. Yeah. I mean, it continues down. That was well, it's interesting because I'm just going to riff on the Brendan Graham Dempsey conversation I had, because you kind of put in there the historical criticism of the ancient text. I think you were pointing at that a little bit. Yeah. So like that deconstructed his faith completely. So, and then he had to, well, that's okay. But
I was going to say, depends how it's taught to you. If it's taught to you through the with
right.
like,
well, it was taught to him very, very different. Yes. And well, that's kind of his point. And this is what's interesting about this conversation is he's like, this is missing from this corner or something. He's like, this needs to be understood or integrated so that doesn't happen to another kid. So
I would agree with that completely. First of all, this conversation does happen, let's say in Jacob's Corner. There's a lot of this, or there has been in the past. This conversation has happened in the past, and you have to have different tools. There are different rabbis that dealt with this, but this is so. There's a famous / secretive sage that talks about how the Torah was given scrolls upon scrolls, which comes to indicate that it wasn't that everything happened on Sinai. Rather, the Levites already had with them some traditions that they came down to Egypt with, and slowly but surely things were put together. Now, for many years in Jewish history, like you didn't even want to teach that sage. Like that's only when you're at a higher level could you start playing with that. But that's way before the Germans start talking about their different authors. So there were hints to this. So the attitude is you have to be able to, deconstruct in a healthy way. And that's why I go back to postmodernism in a certain sense, gives you certain tools to do that if done carefully.
Well, that's what was interesting because I was exposed to that in my biblical training, but it was kind of like you said in like a safer way, and in a way that's like, well, there's different views and we can integrate some of this or not. It was like, and then I was like, okay, and I even did I was telling him this, my church history class was. The text we used was written by an atheist, and so we had to dialogue with the atheist. Like that was as a class, in this small Christian liberal arts college. It was a different way to take these things that had really messed people up and kind of be like, well, let's bring it in this way, and with some care and different things. And so I think that's right. Like these things, and what it sounded like in Brendan is he's a few years, he's 2 years younger than you even. And so he was in high school with the internet 1.0. That didn't really hit for me till college. So like he starts getting exposed to that information and reading that on his own. And it was a very painful experience. And then he was in a tradition that really didn't have any answers for it. And so that's just one example. I mean, you extrapolated that out into some pretty incredible science fiction realities that make total sense to me, which made me think like, did you grow up watching science fiction? Are you a big science fiction fan? Is that part of your, is that part of your...
First of all, so growing up in Israel, it's always like 20 years behind, right? So like really like I was born like in the 60s sort of like, it's not like, and I had older siblings, so my references are really like 80s references. But like the classics like Star Wars, Star Trek, things like that. I don't know if I was. I'm a very big Batman fan, so I have like a bookcase full of philosophy, Jewish texts, and a lot of Batman.
That's cool.
And I have all these different busts. I have like this bust of Heschel and of like Maimonides, and
Bruce.
Then I have like a Batman bust. But so yeah, so like I mean, in the 1500s, there is a rabbi that talks about how in the Tower of Babel they were scared of another flood, and they were trying to leave orbit, and they were trying to construct a spaceship to get to the moon. Pretty crazy to be talking about that, like in the in the 1500s. The Bible, the Talmud talks about Atlantis. So there's always a conversation there. Like the Talmud gives an example of what happens if a woman goes into a ritual bath and there was still semen there from someone else and she gets pregnant. Or what happens if you feed an elephant a straw and on the backside comes out a basket? Or what if there was a man that could have a pen in every one of his fingers and he could twirl them as he writes? And you could see the rabbis were trying to stretch their imagination to like, what does a printer look like? What does like IVF look like? As far as they can. Maimonides talks about like, 1,000 years ago, like a plane, like a metal ship in the sky flying. So I think that that was a very smart move to try to go to the extreme, to try to really cover all your bases, so to speak. My fear is that while I believe Judaism is a phenomenal and a divinely inspired operating system, it is time for an update.
Okay.
One has to do so with care, of course. But it's and like I said, releasing or removing our exile exoskeleton is very, very difficult, both politically, culturally, emotionally. So it's hard to do that. But a part of it is definitely dialogue with our Christian brothers and our Muslim brothers, because otherwise it's not going to work. And Maimonides, this was censored for many, many years. Now, no longer. He gives a beautiful passage talking about ultimately we did not know the path of God, and his ways are only his ways, are not ours. But he sees Jesus and the Muslim. He says, Jesus and the Muslim who came after him, aka Muhammad, are ultimately path makers for God. Right now, that is a very, very powerful statement to say something like that. There are rabbis that talk about how we could potentially even accept Muhammad as a prophet, as long as, again, there's some kosher moves being done. But
that's the language. That's the language that's used about Peterson a lot.
What do you mean?
As a path towards, like a path maker.
Yeah, as a path maker for sure. So I when Jethro wants to leave the camp, he's like, guys, I'm done with this. So Moses tells him, bro, you can't go anywhere. Well, he's not his bro, he's his father-in-law. Dad, you can't go anywhere. And he says, why? He's like, because you will be like eyes for us in the desert. Now, there's different interpretations. Some were saying like, you can't go because you know all our secrets at this point, and if you get caught, you could be used as eyes for the enemy to spy on us. That's one interpretation. Or there's other interpretation, which is your foresight, your ideas are still needed. I still need you. Like, and you could look at, it's flipping Moses, right? When Jethro tells him like, yo, your system's not working, you will surely wilt if you can keep this going. Moses could have been, I was just talking to God, I'm Moses, okay? Like, I can handle this. Nevertheless, there's a recognition, which is you are a high priest. You have a certain structure of how you think this makes sense to do. And I need that. So comes Jordan Peterson and says, I'll build this for you bottom up from evolutionary psychology. I'll give you a path which you can now be eyes and walk through. And that path will allow you to avoid the Amalekites, avoid different issues.
Damn, that's just, that's so wild, man. That's just so wild because huh?
Like it sounds like foolish. Like
no, like no, it's so integral. It's so
I was like, no, being too wild.
No. Wild is cool, I guess, or interesting, or not as wild as in you're getting you're not getting too far out in the weeds. That's not what I'm saying. Like, no, like that makes sense. It just makes sense to me. And whenever I was trying to have conversations, the few that I did try to have about this, it was kind of like, hey, he doesn't, he's no Orthodox Christian or any, like that whole thing or something. And I was just like, he's doing something that, and again, even his caricature, and there's reasons for his current caricature, politically and all that kind of stuff like that. It makes people hard to see this, which I experienced when he was in Little Rock, Arkansas, right before I went to Jonathan Pageau's Symbolic World, and I decided to go see him. I kind of have been on this this is part of a pilgrimage. It's part of a spiritual pilgrimage related to all of this. Getting into this space, starting to have this conversation. And when I went, I was expecting, I might bump shoulders with people in Arkansas that I feel like I can have this conversation with. And it did not leave that event feeling that way. I felt like when I left that event that most of the people were there to see the caricature of Jordan Peterson. Not that there wasn't people there. There's, 10,000 people there or something, but not that there weren't, but I just didn't bump into him like I was hoping to. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I mean, I want to see him wrestle with God. I'm like, when he talks to Destiny and you feel like there's like verbal diarrhea where like he has to like, there's, first of all, I feel like since his quote unquote resurrection, so to speak, right, coming like, his phase 3 or coming back from his crazy sickness, he has a sense of urgency where like every idea has to be like spoken out, said, explored. So like, I want to be like, bro, take a breather for a second, like breathe, relax. Also, you're flipping Jordan Peterson. Have the podcast for 3 hours then. You know what I mean? Like, why does it need to feel like it's like you're rushed? But I feel like he's really spreading out his wings. But when he's, or like, shooting out to all directions. But when he is walking, and again, what you saw in the biblical series, walking across that stage and sort of discussing with us, he's like, this is what I'm working out. That was where, I mean, that's him in his prime. That
was Jordan Hall's comment about feeling like there's Jordan Peterson talking, and then there's Jordan Peterson, to use the Greek, talking like through the Logos in a way with this wisdom and this connection to that spirit of that. I mean,
but so that too. One thing that knocked me off, out of my chair, so to speak, when I was much younger. When I was reading the story of Bilam, the prophet. I don't know if
is that Balaam's donkey?
Exactly, Balaam. Right. So I'm reading the story. First of all, no Israelite is in this story. Right. The sages tell us Moses wrote the Torah and also wrote this specific story through prophecy. But in the middle of our most holy text, we suddenly have a story about this prophet who's not a Jew that's out to get us, and he's a very powerful prophet, and he's having a conversation with God. What? Who's this dude? Why is he having a conversation? And our sages tell us that we have a saying which there never was amongst Israel someone as great as Moses. The qualification is in Israel, but in the world, there was someone as great as Moses. That's Balaam. And the idea was God says, like, it's not fair that I only give a prophet like Moses to the Israelites. I'm also going to give the world an option as well. Here you go. Here's Darth Vader, so to speak, right? You could use this. However, how does he want to use the force? How does he want to participate? And you see different examples between him and Abraham. Abraham wakes up in the morning and gets his donkey prepared. The same terminology is used with Bilam when he wakes up in the morning and gets his donkey prepared. And there's a sense of where we see like both of them have this potential. One is using it for evil, so to speak. Now, Bilam sees the encampment of the Israelites and it's properly oriented. And he says he tries to curse them, but only a blessing comes out. And he says, as long as you're properly oriented, you can't be affected. And it's as if God was telling, hey, Israelites, I'm having a conversation with the rest of the world all the time. You should understand there's other movies happening. There's the Israelite movie that you guys are the heroes of. Great. I understand. But if you switch a different channel, there's, as the prophet says, there's Egypt, my people. There's Assyria, the work of my hands. So God has a different relationship. And so much so that there's other prophets that I'm having a relationship with as well. As long as you keep yourself oriented, you do not have to be worried about getting affected by them. Of course, they fail when Bilam brings in the different Moabite women, and that obviously leads to disaster. But it was a indication to me, which is God is speaking to everyone. God is interested in a conversation with everyone as well. Yes, I'm in season 4,000 of the Jewish story, so to speak, but there's other channels happening. And again, the Noahide version is, so to speak, Netflix, right? It's all open. It's for you to see. You could curate your channel.
Yeah, man. And so here we are,
And here we are.
And I, this journey, I guess one question that was kind of bubbling up during this is I feel like, I don't know, because I'm only 3 months deep into proper TLC, world. And it sounds like you said 2 or 3 years that you've been kind of in this dialogue. And it seemed like there've been different times where there's been tension, I guess, within the community or around some. If you could describe what's how you're seeing things currently in this kind of subculture that we're bouncing around in, what would you say?
So I think like we're in like we've definitely turned a page, I could say, since I came. I think there was like last year, there was another moment where who is TLC? What is TLC? How do you spell TLC? Like who are we? What are we doing? So there was that moment, and that came up again a few months ago. But this is different than that. And I'll get back to that drama, which is this time around, there wasn't someone got up and said, TLC is this, but there was a more sort of refined, mature discussion about that. And you could say like, what's his name again? I'm forgetting his channel. He did that post of like the different flotillas, so to speak. And he had like this different, not the name.
It was Waves of Obsession.
Waves of Obsession. Exactly. So that video, even seeing like a visualization of like, oh, there's like a lot of different like groups happening over here. And the fact that these other channels popped up, you among them, for example, and other channels became like a little more awake, like what's it called? Agapologia.
Yeah.
So all of those little bubbling up showed like a revivification, new blood, a new conversation. I really think there was a shift over there. I think the fact that also the ball dropped, so to speak, with regards to John Vervaeke and Jonathan Peugeot, we're not building community. And comes Paul and says, like, I'm building community. Right. So there was a very stark difference, because ultimately he was like, community, we're building TLC. There are TLC adjacents. And I think like Jordan Hall talking to you, that's a data point, right? Like you were talking about, like, there's a status hierarchy and all that. And like, I love that when he was like, your fans or your views, you're like, I have no, like, I don't have any. But I think those are elements where, he's coming into the conversation right now. And there's the whole Sam Tiedemann going on that podcast. I'm forgetting that guy's name right now, but that's another, what's his name?
Ortland?
Was it Ortland? Not Ortland.
Is he Christian?
Christian, yes, obviously.
Gavin Ortland maybe was one, or I don't know who else.
It was... Either way, it was a bigger channel, so to speak, or like very much Christian YouTube. And it comes in Sam's and has a conversation. I was talking about how he probably is not used to having a conversation like that, which like came with a lot of TLC energy, which is like, I'm here to play, like I'm very chill, good faith, built in steel manning. So I think that's starting to really, there's a certain jargon that's being built up. The chat, the live chat is really that own little subculture is really, really bubbling up. So I think you're seeing a much more richer and a communal version of it from what I experienced, let's say a year ago, which was, so Jacob started this just chattings of these conversations that could go on for like 6 hours, and people would like jump in and out and move in and out. And that really started this idea of just like, let's just be talking and doing this and engaging and having these conversations and hashing out and talking out and giving it the time it needs. That eventually developed into like more specific things, into like more classes, a little more scheduled. Everyone sort of fell into their place. But like Luke doing his like live streams are like similar to that. I came at the very end of these discussions really happening on the Discord. There would be these live chats on the Discord or these video calls, not recorded. So people like Chad wouldn't wear his mask over there, for example. Like it was more candid, and people could be more candid because this disappears once this conversation's done. But there were other conversations there, and they were still feeling out. Like I think a T-Grog would have had a little of a harder time like 2 years ago than he would have right now, where people are more comfortable in their position, more comfortable in their community where they are. And that conversation has toned down a little. Specifically in Jacob's Corner, if you go there, you're in for like a more of a rocky ride, specifically because he has his hierarchy and his rules over there. And while he's loving and created this beautiful space and he wants to talk to Christians, he's there to, call out Paul. This is nonsense. These are like, this is, come at me. And people that I would say go there and like survive Jacob, like, they're good. Basically, like they don't have to be worried about like quote unquote other Billies. I had some interactions with people in this little corner that there's an energy which is, I believe, very toxic. It's very, very, it's not, I don't mind to argue, and you could see videos of Jacob and I arguing, and like it's very passionate, but it's for heaven's sake, and I'm just looking for truth. There's arguments where people act to jerks like other people, they call them out, they steamroll them, and that is, it only gets heightened in this little corner when you're doing that, which is like, this is so not the kind of conversation that we want to have. So there have been like some little breaks off of like, I'm not part of the TLC while still being part of the TLC. But generally speaking, that drama has sort of, I think has subsided. And I think even the fact that the sociologist now joined, so that's also, that's the real world starting to, or if we are in a little corner, the world is starting to look towards that corner, so to speak, or the internet world potentially is starting to look at it. And the question will be, and we don't have to take all this weight on our soldier, but how do we want to respond? So I look at Sam coming out there and engaging in like Christian YouTube is an example of like, we are taking a TLC quote unquote graduate and saying, here, play in the real world right now and see how that interaction looks like. When Paul, for example, talked to Vash compared to Jordan talking to Destiny, that would be a perfect example of like, this was a beautiful, lovely conversation. And Vash was like, this is the coolest Christian I met. So like that conversation could have gone very differently if Jordan wasn't, in his own like mindset, so to speak. So I think those are indications where like we're moving towards, the right place. I don't know if that exactly answered your question though.
No, that's great. Because I wasn't lurking before. I was just listening to the main players consistently, but I wasn't lurking. So I didn't have a context to this thing that all of a sudden I dropped into that I didn't understand. And I've been kind of like, I want to talk. I want to converse. I want to learn. I want to engage. I want to be a part of that conversation. And so that is very helpful. And I think the thing about Peterson is that in some ways he's still a very modern man that was pointing to how we could be meta. And I think that Paul exists more in a meta kind of reality, even though they're roughly the same age, for whatever reasons. And so that may be part of why that seems to work better. But that is interesting. I kind of feel like, well, the conversation that I had with Dempsey today was kind of like, because he was kind of reaching out in his conversation after he had a follow-up to his conversation with Jordan Peterson. And he said, there's people that are in that, TLC scene. He like named it, and with Paul Vanderklay, but he was kind of very much more in a adjacent space. And I mean, Paul is he's a Christian pastor. And so that's gonna create a certain flavor generally because of that. Now he's not dogmatic at all, or generally. And so like that creates space. But this conversation that I had with him, with Brendan, it felt like I was I felt like I was kind of doing that thing that you were just talking about with Sam a little bit. And I think that's interesting. And
I agree. So I think for him, that was like intriguing. Like, who is this guy that's answering me in this sense, where it's not like I'm trying to one up you. It's really just a conversation. So there isn't this.
Well, it's not the zero sum game or whatever. It's a non-competitive. Jordan Hall has a couple of theses on this, like a non-competitive thing. Tries to be, at least. I mean, we're always fighting that impulse, that that evolutionary impulse in a way. And then there's the other part of it that is, like you said, which is this steel manning respect, like a genuine respect for the other side of something. And then there's there's a natural, I think there's a real curiosity, but also a lot of the people that have kind of, I think you were saying, like, if the T-Grog conversation had happened a year or two ago, there would still be a lot more, something I would maybe call like insecurity.
Yeah.
And then there seems like people have settled into certain things, their faith or whatever, in a way that they don't feel as insecure. It's like, okay. And I actually had a conversation with Chad today, and he was saying this is him. It feels like a workshop. Like this whole thing is like it's like a workshop space where we're kind of trying, not necessarily to build one thing, but we're trying to work together.
So I called it a modern day Talmud. So the Talmud is Bible, philosophy, legend, all layered on top of each other. Now, when I learn the Talmud, I'm jumping in to a live conversation going on today and 1,000 years ago. And that allows me to just tap in, and I could discuss with them and argue with them. So this is something that Jews do all around the world. One of its great sages, Rabbi Hillel, there's two famous schools of thought, the Hillelian school of thought and the Shammaian school of thought. And the Hillelian school of thought would first teach the method of Shammai, steel man it, and only then teach their method. And the attitude was like, we first have to fully understand what the opponent is saying. That was built into how that teaching needs to happen. And then that relates to an argument for heaven's sake, which is like, of course you could argue with me, but just because we want to ultimately get to the truth. And the only way we're going to get that is I fully understand you. And that doesn't mean, and that's why I borrowed this term from a rabbi friend of mine, but I dubbed it like a brave space, right? Which is, it's not the safe space. It's a place where I have to be able to speak my mind and be honest about it. But that doesn't mean, and that has to do with the insecurity he was talking about. So if they see Father Stephen DeYoung giving Jacob Federici, who call, Baal of Tartus and like, Jesus is horrible. And like, nevertheless, Father Stephen DeYoung, which I guess you could argue is, let's say, a heavy hitter, so to speak, right? So as a Jew, this dude is coming on a 3-hour stream with Jacob, me, Trey, and some other dude. And we're talking about like Jacob's calling him out, but now he sends Jacob the draft of his new book and asks Jacob to please look at it and let him know of any of those thoughts. Think of the amount of security you need to have in that, both from Jacob to look at this and be like, of course I'll give you notes. I love you, Father Stephen DeYoung. At the same time, obviously the 7 pages over here about Jesus is God, I'm not going to comment on that because my answer would be like, it's not relevant, but that's not what you asked for. And you could assume that I'm going to respect it as such. And
did this happen?
I'm sorry?
Did this happen?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. He's coming out of his new book. He told Jacob, don't publicize and things like that. But like, you could look at it. You could give me your comments. But that is the beautiful space. We can't both be Israel, but if we take ourselves seriously, we could see, what does that mean? How does that relationship look? And that goes back to that email I sent you of that. So I like, were you aware of that, for example?
No, I'm not. I mean, I'm not reading Catholic publications.
Understood. But for the Vatican and what it symbolizes to come and say, hey, you know what? Don't stop trying to convert them. And, it's a mystery, but they have their own right relationship with God. You understand like the amount of pressure that like suddenly gets released when you're like, whoa, okay. Because like that was a completely different conversation for 2,000 years. Now, like that, I mean, it's so miraculous. That's why it gives me hope to my relationship with my Muslim brothers, because we're not there yet. But 100 years ago, what if an art like the Vatican saying something like that would have been a complete miracle. So
why can't it be a miracle today?
Yeah. I mean, every day, slowly but surely, we're moving up that mountain. But I think that you have a certain inertia that's being built up, which I hope will start growing naturally. Like, so I'm not going on there is Jewish YouTube, so to speak, right? But this conversation hasn't hit it yet. It's also because it's very controversial. Now, both on both sides, honestly. First of all, correct, and I don't know what it's like. It's wrong for me to because this is a very controlled group. You have people from the fringe, so it's not really representative of all like Christians. It could be like Christian YouTube to be like, you guys keep on joking around with these Jews online. Like, what's with your deal, right? Like this, for them, this something could look like heresy, but there is a sense where again, if you could see Paul having this lovely conversation with Jacob, or even ripping on each other, the viewers feel safe. They feel like then I'm not threatened by this. They're clearly there's something over here. There's love over here. There's a
relationship. That's and that keeps coming back. The idea of a God's relationship to man as being like an absolute, that this is a relationship, that then also we are embodying that as a reality. And if we base things, and I think that was such the modern mistake was still so tribal. We're just going to get up our people and debate, okay, here's our two, and they're just going to go at, as opposed to a relationship. And even it sounds like sometimes people that were having those debates, they actually had pretty good relationships, but then they felt like they had to placate instead of just
Brett and Sam.
What's that?
I said Brett Weinstein and Sam, right?
Yeah.
There was a relationship, yet they find themselves like in opposing sides right now. And I think that's because, right, we say Moses spoke to God face to face, right? But then the continuation of that verse is as seeing his fellow man, right? And the sense was, can you see the image of God? That's where you see it, in your fellow man. Just like we see with Jacob when he hugs Esau, he says, I saw the face of God in you, right? So that's happening. There's a sense of symmetry. I mentioned this in the past, but we have 2 ears and 2 eyes and 2 nostrils and 2 lungs. There's only 1 heart. And the only time you have symmetry of the heart is if you're hugging someone else, because then you have 2 hearts on either side. And that's the only time that happens, is when you're with someone else. And that's why we have from 2 make 1, right? We create a child and we go back towards that unity. But yes, that is definitely something that we have forgotten, that we're all one, that we're all a community. And unfortunately, Israel was reminded of that in a very harsh way after October 7th. How there was a great unification in the country, but there was a sense where like there's a lot of internal struggle going on over here, and which I also think is very biblical in its own sense. Like I don't think we could really be us until we fully understand who we want to be in Israel, and like that has a lot of political elements and religious elements to it. And again, I think those tensions reverberate to the world out there, and that is what the Jewish nation is also supposed to be. It's proper orientation as an individual, as a family, as a community, as a city, as a body politic, and then that's just for the world to model.
And not only that, but I mean, I feel like that same thing is a core part of Christianity, a core message, and maybe we're sharing that or borrowing that or whatever you want to share. And that for me in my real journey from individual to marriage to family to career to life and now community and the world, like I believe that. I'm trying to live that myself. And I'm guess what it sounds like is I'm trying to join Chezi in that as well. And I think that's pretty cool.
That's what you're being called to do, is very much live in partnership with God. You see this, and there's a stark difference in the Quran. God talks to Adam and then gives Adam the animals' names. Here are the names of the animals. In Judaism and in Christianity, we see God says this crazy verse. He talks to the divine council and says, let's see what this dude's going to name the animals, right? And the sense is God is interested in that partnership with us. He wants that partnership with us. He wants us to create alongside with him. I mentioned in one of my weekly portion reviews how there's the Greek myth of Prometheus, right? He needs to steal fire and bring it down to us. But the Jewish myth is on the 7th day, when the day is coming to an end, Adam starts getting very nervous. This is his first time experiencing night, and he thinks like the world is ending, going back to chaos, so to speak. and then God gives him 2 stones and teaches him how to rub them together. But the sense was it didn't have to be stolen from God like Prometheus, and it's like this forbidden fruit that we're challenging the God in competition. Rather, God gave it to us. However, he didn't just give us fire. He said, work on this, put in effort, build this together, and you could create something new yourself. But I'm going to do this. I'm doing this together with you. So that call is, we just read the portion of, we just started the book of Leviticus. It starts with, and in Hebrew, it's called Vayikra, and he called. And that's the first line. So the commentary on that first line says, that is the eternal call. Before the commandments, before the ordinance, and all the 613 mitzvot, first God spoke to Moses out of love, right? And that is the context that all this is happening in. God is eager to have a relationship with us, so much so that he, and this is the Kabbalistic term, he created tzimtzum, he retracted himself. So there could be space for us as well. That retraction means we don't really get to see God, so to speak. And he also tells Noah when he gives him the covenant of the rainbow, if you notice carefully, it says in Hebrew, it's like, I'll be hiding in the cloud within the cloud, as in like layers of veils that we can't see. But his absence is so palpable, it indicates his existence.
That's kind of like Lewis. If I find in myself desire nothing in this world can satisfy, I can only assume that I wasn't completely made for what we're in.
Correct.
And the thing that you said was, I really thought it was beautiful about kind of the story of God giving us fire and now go do with this thing. And I think, and this was inspired actually from another Jewish person when I actually highlighted the conversation between Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro in a video that said, the time for political conversation is over, for 30,000 foot political conversation is over. It's time to take the conversation back to the campfire. So what do we do with that fire? Let's gather around and try to find each other again. So, man, I'm out of time here, but thank you for coming and having this conversation, and really just sharing deeply meaningful things with each other. And so I'm going to hit the bumper and we're going to end this thing backstage. So thank you so much, Chezi.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud.